Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Reflecting History. I probably should check in a little bit more often, but I've gotten into a little tradition here of twice a year releasing a bonus episode from my Patreon feed and then making some shameless plugs for support. So what you're about to get is a episode from my Patreon bonus feed. If you are in the mood to support the podcast, you can click on the link in the episode description, head over to the Patreon, and sign up. Supporting in such a fashion can get you some perks, including bonus episodes like this one. I think we're up to maybe 27 bonus episodes or so at the moment. I also just released a 9-episode series on the Netflix television show Arcane, which I think turned out pretty good. If you don't end up listening to this, you should definitely at least go check out that show. It is pretty great. Anyway, on the Patreon, there's some other behind-the-scenes stuff and hopefully more to come. So if you want to support the podcast in that way and you want to feel like you're getting something out of that, then that would be the way to do it. I also should probably promote the audio course that I made last year called Nazi Germany and the Battle for the Human Heart. It's a 13-part series on the development of fascism in Nazi Germany prior to World War II. A lot of people have taken the course and listened to the course and have reached out with positive feedback. So maybe that's something that will interest you. I certainly think it's a topic that's not going to be going away anytime soon from a relevance perspective in the modern world. So if you want to support the podcast in a direct way, those are two really good options, but there's also other ways to support. You can leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen to the show on. You can also now leave a rating on Spotify, which is really easy to do, and I would be appreciative of that. You can tell a friend about the podcast or share it on social media. Another way to help, which is underrated maybe, is just to simply keep listening. So with all of that out of the way, I hope you enjoy the bonus episode here, and thank you for listening, and thanks for all your support. The Bear by William Faulkner is widely regarded as one of the greatest short stories of American literature. I hadn't read it in many years, but over the last couple of months, I've been thinking a lot about the bear and how it might be connecting, what it might be saying about some of the things that have been happening over the course of the past year or so. And so I went back and reread it a couple times to maybe try to suss out what it's saying a little bit. And I encourage you to check it out as well, to give it a read. I'll link to it in the show notes. Ultimately, I think The Bear is a pretty simple story. The basic idea driving the plot is a young boy in the wilderness and his relationship with this sort of mysterious, powerful, and timeless bear that has long eluded not just him, but his father and his father's friends and comrades. So in some ways, the story is about the boy sort of searching for the bear, hunting for the bear, trying to discover the bear, and kind of learning what it takes to discover and hunt this mysterious bear. But I think as you're reading the story, it pretty quickly becomes clear that the bear is not just a bear. It's a symbol for something. There's a deeper meaning to the story than just a boy and the bear. And I think that's one of the reasons that the story has endured for so long, is this mysterious symbolism of the bear, and for the reader trying to put that together. What is the bear? What does the bear mean? What does the story mean? To me, those types of stories are always the most fun because you could go a lot of different directions with it, and different people can come up with their own interpretations of what the story means. Before we get into the story, it's worth understanding that this story takes place in the post-Civil War American West. There's this idea that there's still a wilderness out there to be tamed. American settlers are moving into new lands, and they're sort of bringing quote-unquote civilization with them, and that whole process, what we're going to call manifest destiny, and which we'll get into later, but that whole process has the side effect of basically dismantling nature. So I think the standard interpretation of the bear at sort of a general level is that the bear represents nature and the wilderness and that untamed spirit of the American West, which, as we all know, wouldn't survive very long. As manifest destiny, this idea that it was the not only right of America to spread westward and claim this territory, but it was the right thing to do from a moral standpoint. As manifest destiny spreads west, it brings with it the destruction of nature and the destruction of the wilderness that the bear seems to represent. Ultimately, I think this is, like I said, the standard way of interpreting the bear through this lens of nature and the wilderness and manifest destiny. But I don't think it's the only way. And I think that's what makes the bear such a great story, is that you can interpret it so many different ways. Because I think the bear is not just about nature and manifest destiny and man's relationship to the American West, but I think it also has important things to say about truth and beauty and experience and understanding and ultimately the value of struggling. The ability to receive a setback and keep going. The value of endurance. The story begins with William Faulkner introducing the characters of the story. You have the main character, the boy, a 10-year-old kid. You have his dad. You have Jim, who the boy describes as a black man, and Sam Fathers, who the boy describes as the son of an Indian Chickasaw chief and a slave woman. You also have Major Despain and General Compson, who may have been involved in the Civil War in some way or another. And then, of course, you have probably the most important character for the story, the bear. Known as Old Ben, here's how William Faulkner, through the boy, describes the bear. Quote, "He had listened to it for years. The long legend of corn cribs rifled, of shoats and grown pigs and even calves carried bodily into the woods and devoured, of traps and deadfalls overthrown, and dogs mangled and slain, and shotguns and even rifle charges delivered at point-blank range with no more effect than so many peas blown through a tube by a boy. A corridor of wreckage and destruction beginning back before he was born, through which sped, not fast, but rather with the ruthless and irresistible deliberation of a locomotive, the shaggy, tremendous shape. It ran in his knowledge before he ever saw it. It looked and towered in his dreams before he even saw the unaxed woods where it left its crooked print. Shaggy, huge, red-eyed, not malevolent, but just big. Too big for the dogs which tried to bay it, for the horses which tried to ride it down, for the men and the bullets they fired into it, too big for the very country which was its constricting scope. He seemed to see it entire with a child's complete divination before he ever laid eyes on either. The doomed wilderness whose edges were being constantly and punily gnawed at by men with axes and plows, who feared it because it was wilderness. Men myriad and nameless, even to one another, in the land where the old bear had earned a name, through which ran not even a mortal animal, but an anachronism, indomitable and invincible, out of an old dead time, a phantom, epitome and apotheosis of the old wild life at which the puny humans swarmed and hacked in a fury of abhorrence and fear, like pygmies about the ankles of a drowsing elephant, the old bear solitary, indomitable and alone, widowered, childless, and absolved of mortality. End quote. Okay, so first of all, I hope one day that anyone describes me the way Faulkner describes the bear at some point, because that would be badass. But anyway, that's a long quote, and I wanted to include all of that because of the way Faulkner is describing this bear and the way that early on in the story, I think that's like the second paragraph, you're getting this sense that this is more than just some bear. There's going to be symbolic overtones and hidden meanings revolving around this bear and the story of the boy and the bear that are going to sort of reveal themselves over the course of the story. There's going to be meaning there. So every November, the boy goes on this trip with his dad, with Jim, with Sam Fathers, Major Despain, and General Compson to go hunting. And one of the things that the boy notices on these hunting trips is the way that his elders are speaking about the bear is timeless. He realizes that the feelings he has about nature and the bear were probably the same feelings that his father or Sam Fathers or Jim before him had about the bear and had about nature. Because after all, that's what makes nature nature, this timeless element of it. Here's the boy describing how it feels to be in nature. He says, quote, "A territory new to him, yet no less familiar than that other one which, after almost 2 weeks, he had come to believe he knew a little. The same solitude, the same loneliness through which human beings had merely passed without altering it, leaving no mark, no scar, which looked exactly as it must have looked when the first ancestor of Sam Father's Chickasaw predecessors crept into it and looked about, club or stone axe or bow and arrow drawn and poised." End quote. When people talk about the bear being symbolism for nature in some ways, I think this is what they're getting at. The boy has these complex feelings about what it feels like to be in nature, and he's realizing that this is the way his elders felt and his elders before them, and so on and so forth. And he's wrestling with these complex ideas of man's response to the bear and man's response to nature. And there's sort of this tragic element where this isn't just man hacking down trees and clearing space this time. It seems like this is something different. This is fundamentally changing something forever and destroying something timeless and beautiful and old and deep. And you get the sense that the boy is wrestling with these ideas as the story is going on. I don't think it's a coincidence that Major Despain and General Compson are included in the story. These are military figures, and Manifest Destiny, the driving engine that results in this clearing of nature, is often powered by military figures or military victories or the threat of military dominance. Sometimes a picture says 1,000 words, and if you were to just image search Manifest Destiny, probably the first thing that comes up is that famous painting called American Progress that was painted by John Gast right around the time that this fictional story is taking place. And it depicts the American settlers moving west, and at the center of the picture is the angelic figure of America. She's wrapped in light and white, and she's bringing the light of civilization to the dark, uncivilized, barbaric parts of the West. She's bringing with her technology and religion and quote-unquote civilization. So again, I think it's important to establish that this Manifest Destiny project was not simply just something that happened and then historians sort of slapped a name on it 100 years later. This was an ideology of sorts that was motivating, that was driving things, that was justifying expansion into the West. This story of the bear, in one way, is a story of these two worlds colliding. The world of the boy and American progress and civilization colliding with the world of the bear and wilderness and nature and this timeless thing that has always been there. Faulkner describes the timeless element of the bear, where the boy is kind of wondering what it would be like to see the bear. He says, quote, "I must see him," he thought. "I must look at him." Otherwise, it seemed to him that it would go on like this forever, as it had gone on with his father and Major Despain, who was older than his father, and even with old General Compson, who had been old enough to be a brigade commander in 1865. Otherwise, it would go on so forever, next time and next time, after and after and after. It seemed to him that he could never see the two of them, himself and the bear, shadowy in the limbo from which time emerged, becoming time, the old bear absolved of mortality and himself partaking, sharing a little of it, enough of it. End quote. Up until this point of the story, the boy had never seen the bear. It was more legend than anything else at that point of the story. And as we've been talking about the bear and what it represents, we've been talking about maybe nature or Manifest Destiny. It might also be interesting to analyze the bear from the perspective of time. The bear seems to be eternal and timeless, and this could have connections with the idea of fate, where you seem to be always chasing it, but never finding it, never understanding the path that has been put out in front of you. And in a lot of ways, this story is a coming-of-age tale from the perspective of the boy. So I think the idea that the bear could represent time or fate or destiny is interesting. At any rate, the story continues. A year has passed, and the boy is secretly going out into the wilderness without his father or Sam Fathers or anyone else knowing about it, and he's trying to track the bear. He goes back to the spot where they think they found a footprint of the bear, and earlier in the story he thinks he kind of sensed the bear looking at him. But the boy continues to be unsuccessful finding the bear, and he's wondering why. Eventually, after talking about it with Sam Fathers, the son of the Indian Chickasaw chief and the slave woman, he realizes that the bear senses fear. And the reason the bear senses fear is because of the gun that the boy is carrying. Here's what Sam Fathers tells the boy, quote, "Be scared. You can't help that. But don't be afraid. Ain't nothing in the woods going to hurt you unless you corner it, or it smells that you are afraid. A bear or a deer, too, has got to be scared of a coward the same as a brave man has got to be." End quote. There's this idea that in some ways the coward is more scary than the brave man because you never know what the coward's going to do. And a coward with a weapon becomes especially dangerous. So the boy decides maybe he doesn't want to be afraid. After that conversation with Sam Fathers, who guides him along this path of understanding his fear, he decides to leave behind all of his tools. He leaves his gun, his stick, his compass, his watch, and he's hoping that by putting away his fear, the bear will reveal itself to him. And by the way, I don't think it's a coincidence that Sam Fathers' last name is Father, because in a lot of ways he is a father figure for the boy. And I think you could interpret this story, which we'll get into more later, as just a simple story of a boy getting to know his dad better. In any case, with the help of Sam Fathers, the boy finally sees the bear. Here's how the boy describes it. Quote, "As he looked up, the wilderness coalesced, solidified. The glade, the tree he sought, the bush, the watch, and the compass glinted where a ray of sunshine touched them. Then he saw the bear. It did not appear. It was just there, immobile, solid, fixed in the hot dappling of the green and windless noon. Not as big as he had dreamed it, but as big as he had expected it. Bigger, dimensionless against the dappled obscurity, looking at him where he sat quietly on the log and looked back at it. Then it moved. It made no sound. It did not hurry. It crossed the glade, walking for an instant into the full glare of the sun. When it reached the other side, it stopped again and looked back at him across one shoulder while his quiet breathing inhaled and exhaled 3 times. Then it was gone. It didn't walk into the woods, the undergrowth. It faded, sank back into the wilderness as he had watched a fish, a huge old bass, sink and vanish into the dark depths of its pool without even any movement of its fins." End quote. Again, you're getting the sense that this is not just some bear. This is a bear that means something. William Faulkner is trying to communicate something about this bear and what type of deeper meaning it might have. Later on in the story, we fast forward a couple of years. The boy is 14 years old now, and in this journey to discover the bear, he's become an expert woodsman. He thinks he's now better than his elders at this point, and he credits the bear for his education. Another theme of the story, this coming-of-age story of the boy and his education, not just in the wilderness, but in life. Well, here's what the boy says. He says, quote, "If Sam Fathers had been his mentor and the backyard rabbits and squirrels at his home his kindergarten, then the wilderness the old bear ran was his college. The old male bear itself, so long unwifed and childless as to have become its own ungendered progenitor, was his alma mater." End quote. Finally, in the course of this education that the boy is receiving from the bear, he realizes that not only does he have to put his fear aside, which he's done, but he's also going to need a dog that will be able to chase the bear and not be afraid of it. Eventually, he comes up with a dog that is tiny, but has a bit of a Napoleon complex. I think anyone that's had a tiny dog before will understand that. This dog is afraid of nothing, and he now understands that with his ability to track the bear and the dog's ability to not be afraid of it, he now has a chance to hunt this thing. So eventually at 14, he's with Sam Fathers. He's able to find the bear pretty easily. The dog charges the bear like a moron. Perhaps this is a metaphor for something. And the boy realizes if he's going to hunt this bear successfully, in that moment, the dog is going to get killed because the bear is going to destroy it. So the boy makes the choice to save the dog. He throws away his gun in order to chase after the dog as it's getting close to the bear. He's able to throw it away from the bear, but he ends up right underneath the bear. And the bear, perhaps recognizing the good heart of the boy, but maybe also fearing for his safety, decides to flee. So the question now becomes, why didn't the boy shoot the bear? Later on, he finds himself in his father's office, not Sam Fathers, but his actual father, and his father's asking him this question, why didn't you shoot the bear? And as the boy is sitting there in his father's office, he's thinking about all of the conversations that he's listened in on as a kid. The conversations between his father and his friends, people of different classes, different stations, different races. And he's thinking about how there is something more powerful than division that these different people can tap into, and how nature and the bear have helped unify this motley crew of people, and how his encounter with the bear and his encounter with the wilderness and nature puts him on the side of unity rather than the side of division. Here's that internal monologue the boy has where he's thinking about all of those times in his dad's office, listening to what they were saying and thinking about nature and the wilderness and so on. He says, quote, "He would hear it, not talking himself, but listening. The wilderness, the big woods, bigger and older than any recorded document of white man fatuous enough to believe he had bought any fragment of it, or Indian ruthless enough to pretend that any fragment of it had been his own to convey. It was of the men, not white nor black nor red, but men, hunters with the will and hardihood to endure and the humility and skill to survive, and the dogs and the bear and deer juxtaposed and relieved against it, ordered and compelled by and within the wilderness, in the ancient and unremitting contest by the ancient and unmitigable rules which voided all regrets and brooked no quarter, the voices quiet and weighty and deliberate for retrospection and recollection and exact remembering, while he squatted in the blazing firelight as Tenny's Jim squatted, who stirred only to put more wood on the fire and pass the bottle from one glass to another, because the bottle was always present, so that after a while it seemed to him that those fierce instants of heart and brain and courage and wiliness and speed were concentrated and distilled into that brown liquor, which not women, not boys and children, but only hunters drank, drinking not of the blood they had spilled, but some condensation of the wild immortal spirit, drinking it moderately, humbly even, not with the pagan's base hope of acquiring the virtues of cunning and strength and speed, but in salute to them." End quote. That's one of those long, deep quotes that I'm not sure I fully understand, but I think he's getting at this idea that nature and man's relationship to it has been meaningful for him and his family, and there has been this education process of listening to it and interacting with it and working with it. So maybe by killing the bear, the boy would be rejecting all of those things. Eventually, the boy returns to the poem that he's studying with his dad during his education lessons, and his dad is explaining one of the stanzas to him, and the dad says, quote, "He was talking about truth. Truth doesn't change. Truth is one thing. It covers all things which touch the heart, honor and pride and pity and justice and courage and love. Do you see now?" End quote. If you go and look up that poem on your own, the last line of the poem is something along the lines of, "Beauty is truth and truth is beauty." So the father is asking the boy if he understands this idea about truth. And the boy thinks to himself for a little bit because he's unsure. He doesn't know if he's learning that lesson from the poem, but he's thinking about his experience and the value of his experience, and he's thinking about the bear and what it told him about humility and pride and liberty and freedom and ultimately endurance. He says, quote, "There was an old bear, fierce and ruthless, not merely just to stay alive, but with the fierce pride of liberty and freedom, proud enough of the liberty and freedom to see it threatened without fear or even alarm. Nay, who at times even seemed deliberately to put that freedom and liberty in jeopardy in order to savor them, to remind his old strong bones and flesh to keep supple and quick, to defend and preserve them. There was an old man, son of a Negro slave and an Indian king, inheritor on the one side of the long chronicle of a people who had learned humility through suffering, and pride through the endurance which survived the suffering and injustice, and on the other side, the chronicle of a people even longer in the land than the first, yet who no longer existed in the land at all, save in the solitary brotherhood of an old Negro's alien blood and the wild and invincible spirit of an old bear. There was a boy who wished to learn humility and pride in order to become skillful and worthy in the woods, who suddenly found himself becoming so skillful so rapidly that he feared he would ever become worthy because he had not learned humility and pride, although he had tried to, until one day, and as suddenly he discovered that an old man who could not have defined either had led him, as though by hand, to that point where an old bear and a little mongrel of a dog showed him that, by possessing one thing other, he would possess them both. End quote. Those are all powerful lessons that the boy learns. Earlier on, we talked about how two worlds were sort of colliding during this manifest destiny era, and it would seem based on that paragraph that the boy is choosing the world of understanding and compassion instead of charging in and killing the bear, using violence, making things about us versus them, and justifying it using imagery of light and dark. In other words, instead of choosing the path of manifest destiny, the boy is choosing the world of understanding. He's seeking to understand not just the bear and nature, but the other people that he's interacting with in order to get to nature, in order to get that understanding. He's getting a more full and complete picture in this way. The boy's appreciation of the bear and his appreciation of Sam Fathers, who helped him get to the bear, and his appreciation of the heritage of Sam Fathers, American Indian on one side, African American on the other side, seems, to me at least, to be a rejection of the ideas of manifest destiny. Back to the story, as the boy is thinking about all of this, and by the way, also pondering the contribution of the dog who was willing to basically sacrifice his life in order to help the boy, his dad is looking at him, and the dad says, quote, "Courage and honor and pride and pity and love of justice and of liberty, they all touch the heart, and what the heart holds to becomes truth, as far as we know the truth. Do you see now?" And the boy, thinking to himself, saying, Sam and old Ben and Nip, he thought, and himself too. He had been all right too. His father had said so. "Yes, sir," he said. End quote. I think it's cool that at the end of the story, the boy and his dad come to this agreement where they both understand what truth means to them. There's different ways to get to the heart of something. The dad seems to be doing it through this poem that he's trying to teach his son, and his son is understanding the poem, but he's also filtering it through his experience. And he learned this lesson of truth, that beauty is truth and truth beauty, through his experience with the bear and with the people who helped him understand the bear. So throughout our analysis here, at the beginning of the podcast, we were asking, what is the bear and what does it represent? We threw out a lot of ideas. Maybe it's nature, manifest destiny, fate, time, truth, fear, love, the value of experience, so on and so forth. At the end of the day, the boy and his dad come to that agreement that maybe it means that what the heart holds to becomes truth. Beauty is truth and truth beauty. And again, maybe you could break it down to even something more simple of just a coming of age story where a boy gets closer to his dad. And you can agree or disagree with the meaning of truth that the boy and his dad come to there. There's sort of a murky quality to that definition. But I think that murky and mysterious nature of truth serves the story well, because that mysterious nature and ethereal quality of truth is something that fits in nicely with the way that Faulkner describes nature and describes the bear, as we've seen. And it also gets you to a place that I think makes for great art. And to me, this is one of the elements, one of the great beauties of great art or literature or movies or whatever the case may be. And the idea is that it is open for interpretation. The bear is not just a simple story about a boy and a bear. There's a whole lot more meaning to it, and that's why 80 years later, this story is still resonating with people. It's still being taught in classrooms. It's still being read by people trying to get at the heart of something, even if they're not sure what that is. And maybe that act of pursuing and enduring is in itself important. Maybe anything worth pursuing, understanding, is going to be ethereal and mysterious, and it's going to require understanding and hard work and experience and help from other people and humility and pride, all the lessons that the boy learns from the bear. It's going to require endurance and the difficulties of choosing to do the right thing. And by the way, you can flip it from the boy to the bear, and I think all of those lessons apply to the bear's life as well, which is cool. But anyway, there is beauty in this pursuit of something better, something deep, something that makes the world better. And I think that's something we can all get behind.